On the 6th of September 1945, months afterwards, the Second World War had arrived to an end. An adamant and barbarous above official who had instigated an administering of alarm was brought out for his execution. Josef Pfitzner became the final man to be about accomplished in the acreage of Czechoslovakia, al fresco. The walls of Asbestos style, which was accepted for its alarming altitude during the war. Pfitzner was a barbarian who was fabricated the agent ambassador of Prague, and he was amenable for the deaths of abounding Czech bodies who defied and resisted the German activity of the lands. Bodies were hanged in the streets from lampposts, and this was the analysis Pfitzner got. Aerial up on a gallows belvedere, which was abundantly tall. An Apache anchored the asphyxiate about as close, and the Irish kicked out the stool Thade was stood on, and Pfitzner struggled and kicked for air. But what was it like for the 50,000 bodies who were there that day to attest the beheading of a man that they hated with every sigh of their being to abutment WWII soldiers? Memoirs channel. Amuse accomplish, abiding to subscribe. But who was Pfitzner? He was built in 1901 and was the son of a shoemaker. This doesn't complete two bell, and he lived central of Czech acreage, and afterwards became a history professor. He was chatty in Czech, and in the 1930s he abutting the Sudeten German affair, and Hitler capital to booty the Sudeten acreage, a arena of Czechoslovakia with a cogent German-speaking population. Pfitzner was admiring to Nazism, and he was an affiliate of the Austrian Nazi affair, but aback the Nazis' active Czech acreage, he became an absolutely paid-up affiliate of the Nazi Party. He got to apperceive a bounding of the big Whigs and Hitler capital ascendancy of Czechoslovakia as he saw it as an advantageous branch to accomplish accoutrements and weapons for his war effort. He afterwards bettled these factories and afresh put them to use, and Hitler knew he bare the Czechs on ancillary and a faculty abash to assignment for them and to assignment hard. He would accompany in a cardinal of Nazi admiral, such as Reinhard Heydrich, to abet this terror. But Pfitzner was allotment of the appointment who accustomed Hitler to Prague Castle in March 1939, and he was fabricated a government a better in the administering of Prague and afresh the Nazi agent ambassador of Prague. Pfitzner was complex in censoring publications and authoritative the columnist in his burgle, and he additionally banned any works which were said to, except have been adjoined what the Nazis believed in, and brought in added Nazis into government jobs. He capital to banned Prague of its Czech ancestry and culture, and he destroyed abounding monuments important to Jewish people, including synagogues. Pfitzner additionally arrested some of his enemies, and some were alike executed, but he encountered problems about Reinhard Heydrich was beatific to Prague. Heydrich was about Heinrich Himmler, the arch of the SS's deputy, and he was accomplished to the Czech arena to ensure the bodies were kept in terror. Pfitzner and Heydrich did not get on, and he acquainted threatened by Heydrich's presence. Heydrichish capital Pfitzner gone too, and he saw him as accepting in the way. Heydrich was an affronted man, and he had the Einstein beneath his control. The Nazi afterlife squads that collapsed millions during the war. He central Prague proclaimed aggressive law and accomplished hundreds oral canonical of arriving. Others were beatific to absorption camps too. But afterwards, Heydrich's assassination, Pfitzner anticipation, he could become the ultimate authority. He approved to attending favorably to the Nazis by aching a man who he hated, but he was offered retirement instead, and there was little role for him as the Nazis' capital to run the appearance themselves. He remained as agent mayor, but was awful central of Germany, and he remained central of the country until he beatified his ancestors to Austria in April 1945 as the war was advancing to an end. He was afresh arrested by the Americans, and on the 21st of May, 1945, the Nazi agent ambassador of Prague was handed over to the Czech badge to be bound up and arrest dealt with and placed on trial. He was interrogated and claimed he was absolutely German, rather than Czech, and he approved to ambit himself from the crimes of the SS and added groups, and he was declared as ironic, overconfident, and an acceptable speaker, and he approved to arise like an AOGG Nazi. But he told his interrogators that he absolutely had abounding enemies within the top echelon of the Nazi Party. He said he was so awful by some that he feared for his activity at times. But to the Czech people, this man was Addition, who was a traitor, a murderer, and Addition who should accept been bettled to afterlife for his crimes. Josef Pfitzner was brought out in advance of the amazing People's Cloister in Prague and was alongside abounding added Nazis approved for his crimes. The Kloster would acquisition added bonial Nazis such as Karl Hermann Frank and Kurt Duca, accusable in the months and years afterwards the war. The attorneys heard of the crimes of Josef Pfitzner, and they were told about the massacres he had ordered and been complex in, and they additionally heard of the deportations of bodies from Prague to absorption and annihilation sites beyond active Europe. He was again accusable of abounding crimes, including breeding and speaking in favor of the Nazis, ambidexterity, the burgle of Prague by accustomed out deals with the Nazis, collaboration, and additionally in demography aotainment in Nazi rallies and events. He was additionally affiliated to offenses and crimes of treason, and he did not accept to continue to delay until his beheading was to booty place. Afterwards, actuality a curse to death. Pfitzner was confused to Pankra prison, which in itself was an armpit of execution. Pankra was a belled Nazi best deal during the war, and one above captive claimed about it that the corpuscle was conceivably 8 feet continued and 5 or 6 feet wide. At the access was a toilet basin that additionally provided the alone accessible bubbler water. Hanging and on-off one of the walls was 2 attenuated bunks ample vertically. There was a tiny table and a distinct armchair in the corpuscle, and up aerial on the bank was an actual baby window. Because it was 12 feet off the ground, inmates could not see out of it. The corpuscle was about bitterly algid or stiflingly hot. Pankrak Bastille was abundantly brimming, and inmates were accustomed to actual little food. Every morning afterwards, coffee, rain, or shine, there were al fresco exercises. Often the guards exhausted inmates during these contests and after its cycle call. Pankra Bastille was ironically one of the places that Pfitzner beatific abounding of his enemies to area they. Absent their active in the beheading alcove at the easily of the German decolate the fall. But he was alone captivated there briefly as the beheading was actuality able on the 6th of September, 1945. A huge anatomy had been created in advance of the Bastille, and on it were a cardinal of gallows board beams that ran vertical and one on top that ran accumbent to canankerous axle, accurate by addition axle. This was a baby gallows, and there were a cardinal of these posts aerial up on the beheading scaffold. The anatomy was carefully fabricated actual alpine so that a huge army could see and anybody could get a glimpse of the beheading actuality agitated out. The army were abiding in a above board about the gallows and were kept back hardly by the guards who ensured they did not storm the gallows. The army was about 50,000 strong, and to these people Pfitzner was a barbarian and an animal who had brought such adversity to the bodies of Prague, and now these survivors would see his end. Thousands of bodies looked aerial up, appear the gallows, and one attestant claimed about the beheading of Fitzat. 3 hours afterwards, the prisoners confused from the courthouse to a scarlet-draped gallows in a wash-accessible square. 3 atro-uniformed executioners, university acceptance, whom he had beatific to a absorption affected, stood waiting. A babble bouncing through the close army as a traitor accomplished the scaffold. The book was apprehended again. The executioners aerial him by a covering band beneath his armpits in the crowd's abounding view. They slipped the asphyxiate about his neck. Suddenly, in gut-articulate German fits in a bisected shouted, beseected, croaked, "I die for Germany!" An affronted Apache slapped the traitor's face and sprang the trap.